Burnley had seen their long-awaited escape from Division 4 go down the pan in the playoffs before manager Frank Casper resigned. Their much-needed resurrection seemed further away than ever. We left you at yesterday's video with the shock resignation of Frank Casper mere months after falling just short of promotion via the playoffs. Moments into what was their 7th season in the 4th tier, he was gone and Burnley were back to square one. Casper had made plenty of moves in the transfer market ahead of the 91-92 season, replacing the want-away Ron Futcher with a cheap alternative in Mike Conroy. His ingenuity knew no bounds as he replaced Steve Davis with another lad called Steve Davis. Together with the acquisition of Mark Yates, the Clarets business was performed at a net positive. Those positives soon drained out of the club owing to a messy run of results in pre-season, which bled into the normal campaign. Whilst Roger Eli bagged the club's first hat-trick in 6 full years at home to Chesterfield on September the 3rd, and there was a relentless 4-1 win down at Doncaster days prior, the Clarets also succumbed to 3 losses on the spin, the latter of which, an embarrassing 3-1 loss at Scarborough, ended the tenure of Casper. He was succeeded by his former assistant Jimmy Mullen. The transformation was utterly sensational.
Jacob with a corner, usual targets are up for him, and there's one of those targets, Steve Davis.
In which to build their final effort. His second half goal polished off Halifax.
They'd been transformed that much that Jimmy Mullen had been named 4th Division's Manager of the Month, an accolade which went some way to hiring the caretaker in a full-time position. It can't have harmed that Turf Moor were now receiving 10,000 people a game, as promotion was locked into the club's crosshairs. Top 3 by New Year, the manager was not relenting as he added Adrian Randall and Robbie Painter in the winter. As they exited the FA Cup after a 3rd round replay against Derby County, the Clarets earned plenty of plaudits for the method of their play. They were suddenly calling it the Burnley way, pass and move football out from the back, but when it called for it, direct and incisive. They found themselves on the precipice of the 3rd tier despite not having much of a first choice goalkeeper all season. A win at Bootham Crescent on April 28th would seal it.
Williams couldn't hold it, and Blackstone puts York in front. O'Keeley's lost it. Painter denied by Tutil. Deary! John Deary has equalised. Big run. John Francis. They came to York in their thousands. They're going home as champions.
7 years of hell finally over. They were on an even keel financially, the squad had a good balance and there was a harmony between players, manager, supporters and the boardroom for the first time in a long while. There was enough momentum in the club now to possibly begin to dream of Division 1 thanks to the quirks of football and 1992 remodelling.
He did an early goal against Burnley at Turf Moor, a neat passing move and a confident finish from Steve Harper.
Scott Green, Patterson, no, yes! David Lee, what a goal, what a ding-dong do!
Club since the end of October. The first came only minutes after Heath's goal.
When David Campbell had acres of space on the right, his cross caused problems for the defence, and Heath's diving header was spot on.
Naturally, the results were indifferent upon the Clarets' re-emergence into the 3rd tier. Whilst they could comfortably chuck in a 3-0 defeat at Chester, they could just as easily thrash the same opposition 5-0 back at Turf. They weren't the only club to feel Burnley's wrath. Fulham got slapped 5-2, whilst clubs as lofty as Blackpool, Huddersfield and West Brom were all readily beaten prior to Christmas. They even had time to knock John Bond's Shrewsbury Town out of the FA Cup 2nd round for good measure. Despite key injuries to key men, despite sales like John Francis to Cambridge United as well as a raft of other departures, the Clarets were locked tidily to mid-table in a safe position. In Adrian Heath, Burnley acquired an exciting signing even if he wasn't the player he was at Everton in '84. However, he was still good enough to steer Burnley through to consolidation in his 20 goals to be named Supporters Player of the Season. In Marlon Beresford, Mullen belatedly found his dependable goalkeeper, where previously he'd used 5 different names as his number 1. His displays earned him the tag of Division 2's Goalkeeper of the Season. Momentum now lived at Turf Moor. The only sadness was the premature end to the career of Roger Eli, who just couldn't shake his persistent knee injuries. However, the club was in rude financial health, as seen by an annual profit of 302 grand. Consequently, they went big in the market, spending close to £500,000 on Blackpool wide man David Ayres, goal scorer Kevin Russell, whilst stealing midfielder Warren Joyce was purchased from Plymouth and Gary Parkinson seemed a solid enough buy at right back. As Mike Conroy and Ian Measham were both let go, Kevin Russell didn't last too much longer. 28 league games into his Burnley career, the club sold him at a loss, with both Ted McMinn and Tony Philliskirk appointed as his cheaper successors. Despite the club clawing on to a playoff spot on Christmas Day with comfortable wins dished out to Fulham, Brighton, Plymouth and Cambridge, some supporters had lost patience with the manager. Mullen's tactics demanded that Burnley play with the same attacking verve away from home as they did at Turf Moor. Many thought it wasn't working to its full potential, yet despite their position, there was every chance that 1994 could still be a glorious year yet.
Well, almost left it to Philliskirk. Almost a chance for Deary. Must be a chance for Philliskirk. Chip in. Chance for Philliskirk. A goal by Tony Philliskirk.
With Marlon Beresford thwarting a ridiculous 5 penalties at one end and David Ayres a comparative goal machine from midfield with 28 in all competitions, the playoffs were confirmed with a penultimate day win over Brentford. Ultimately, it was a campaign that left a lot to be desired on their travels, but a fortress made out of Turf Moor. So much so that 55 of their 73 points were gained at home. In the playoffs, they were to meet a Plymouth side who were 12 points ahead of them in the table. They traded victories in the regular season, 6-5 in Burnley's favour, and a repeat of that would be preferable. However, Plymouth entered the semi-finals in a better mood, having signed off with an 8-1 obliteration over Hartlepool, whilst Burnley limped to a defeat against relegated Exeter.
Newell swing the ball in towards Marshall, who gets a flick on, a chance for the shot now, and Marshall! Bring it forward. Francis getting away from Comin. Nichols has had to come off his line. John Francis! Francis again bringing the ball away, looking to get through that gap in the middle, and he might get the shot in here. And he does! And John McMinn looks for space to get the cross in. Gets a shot in instead, comes off Nichols. And that surely is good night for Plymouth Argyle.
Plymouth had sold 40,000 preliminary tickets for Wembley, tickets that would never be realised. Warren Joyce, the scorer of Burnley's third goal in the second leg, had of course been signed from Plymouth the prior summer. The Burnley Wembley opponents were Stockport, another team who finished 12 points above them, but one that the Clarets had yet to defeat all season.
Burnley will have to organise rather quickly as we have 5 players in that. In fact, a goal on 4 minutes to Stockport take the lead. They come forward again, rash challenge. In fact, I may have seen a kick there on Ted McMinn. Certainly everything happening in these first 15 minutes as that red card is raised aloft. You run on the edge of that penalty area as the chance gone. A great goal by David Ayres, a superb run. Another off the ball incident, certainly didn't see that as Burnley streamed forward with Warren Joyce.
Oh, that Thompson was down on the ground, so we're seeing what the referees decided.
It's red. Deary, chip in again, can't find maybe a chance for Parkinson, and it's in the net.
It had been a bewildering decade away from the second tier of English football, but Burnley were back and they were adamant that they wouldn't make the same mistakes as they did in 82-83 when they immediately went back down. Jimmy Mullen was handed what in relative terms you simply have to call a war chest, as over £1 million was used to go out and get some signings. Whilst a quarter of that was used to bring in frontman Liam Robinson to Turf Moor for a club record fee, he'd be joined by ample reinforcements. Coventry City's John Gale was a big name but would ultimately last just 5 months before returning to the Midlands, and Stoke for the same price. Liverpool's Paul Stewart arrived on loan, another disaster, having appeared just 6 times in the league before returning to Anfield. Then there were the injury-crippled Alan Harper and Steve Thompson, who didn't make the most of their full potential, while Sheffield United's Jamie Hoyland and Bolton's Mark Winstanley lasted a little longer. And yet...
Directing traffic on his goal line. Ball comes in, dangerous one, and the ball in the back of the net.
Adrian Heath was no longer a goal-scoring touch in an elevated division for a club that couldn't boast a single player in double figures for goals all season. This was supposed to be the season of Liam Robinson leading the line, however, he'd only be able to find the net every 4 matches. There, Burnley's problems were laid bare as they scored just twice in the first 5. It was beginning to feel a lot like the doomed 82-83 campaign already, and summer was still hanging on in there. Suddenly the outlook was far kinder to Burnley, given how difficult it had become to defeat them. Between September the 3rd and the end of the year, the Clarets lost only 4 of 17 games. Of the 5 wins they had recorded in the same time frame, they had all come against clubs that had recently appeared in the top tier: Luton, Millwall, Charlton, Notts County and Sheffield United. Given the club's games in hand, 19th place in a new division had grown into a respectable enough start, especially considering the glimpses of good form that they had shown. But then 1995 had to start.
Him Australian born, and he came to Elm Park during the summer, signed from Ipswich Town.
Oh, and a mistake from Russell, and that is a goal.
Quite possibly the worst possible start to a calendar year ever seen at Turf Moor. By the time Burnley won a league fixture on March 11th, their relegation was all but confirmed. Their games in hand had yet to be whittled away, but the Clarets were now an enormous 10 points from safety. Jimmy Mullen was now desperate, as Kurt Nogan broke the club's transfer record at $300,000 in advance of an FA Cup distraction against Liverpool. He was followed by Chris Vinicombe from Rangers for a shade under that amount, but his season would be dogged by injury almost immediately. Whilst they had stemmed the bleeding of 1 point from their first 10 matches in '95, their March and April seesawing between victory and defeat had come far too late to mount a survival bid. Ultimately, they made it until April 22nd in their third from last game of the season, when the visit of Portsmouth ended Burnley's campaign as a contest with their relegation. Maybe had there been the usual 3 teams relegated from the second tier, maybe Burnley might have stood a better chance. Whilst a club record amount was spent on transfers during the season, the task in the new division was revealed when clubs like Wolves were struggling to go up, having spent £4 million. Either way, Burnley were back in Division 2 and would have to start again. The bloom was off the rose in regards to Jimmy Mullen with the Burnley supporters. He was given one last chance to return the Clarets to some kind of respectability. What the solitary season in the second tier allowed for was a Football League Foundation grant and 50% towards the cost of stadium renovations to the Longside and B-Hull end. It came to a total of $5.28 million as Turf Moor was dragged into the oncoming 21st century with its Taylor Report and all-seater stadia. Work would start on the new-look ground after the 2-1 win over Hull in September. Whilst Mullen wasn't able to generate big fees for some of his flops of the prior season, Steve Davis did move on to Luton at a $750,000 fee, whilst others like John Mullin and John Pender also departed. The manager had a new tactic to offer as well, the 5-3-2, to mix reviews in the first half of the season.
It's going to be Carl Heggs to take it. Oh, and it's saved. Superb stuff from Marlon Beresford.
Skinner ghosting in and then out, and a good effort, and it's more than that, it's a sensational goal.
It had been the proverbial parachuted landing back into the third tier, with indifferent form giving way for a goal-laden Clarets team that could just as easily ship 4 at Chesterfield and at home to Notts County as they could inflict the same on Swansea and Stockport. And after a 4-3 win over Stockport on January the 13th, Burnley were well wrapped up inside of the playoff spaces and just 6 points off an automatic spot. 96 though quickly took a turn for the worst, 4 defeats without scoring, which unfortunately concluded Mullen's time at the club after an exchange at a restaurant with a disgruntled supporter making his mind up for him. Now what? Still only 3 points off the playoffs, former player Adrian Heath was selected, ahead of names such as Steve Coppell and Mike Walker, who apparently were in the frame. And the club wound up winning only 4 of their remaining 19 games.
scored a hat-trick in 13 minutes. That was his first.
It was grim. Adrian Heath attempted to ensure his first full season wouldn't go the same way, as he instantly obliterated the club's transfer record when he brought Paul Barnes in from Birmingham City. 400 grand was the fee. The objective was score some bloody goals. A middling start of 4 wins and 5 defeats from the first 10 matches, Barnes had yet to find the net. Then Stockport County turned up on October the 5th, and the rest was history.
Great goal. Was closed down. Oh dear. Had to be. Oh, and 2 defenders in the way. Barnes again. Can you believe it? 5-2 now to Burnley.
Barnes wasn't the only one through the door. Andy Cook was acquired at a snip for 40 grand, whilst Paul Weller had graduated from the academy from a wide midfield role. Here come the puns. The Clarets showed they had the jam, maintaining a playoff challenge throughout the season as they headed into 1997, only goal difference keeping them out of the top 6 after a 5-1 thrashing of Gillingham. That's entertainment. The start of 97 could have gone better, Burnley almost becoming a town called Malice in home defeats to Preston and York. Nonetheless, an April win over Millwall meant their news of the world was Clarets in the playoff spots with 5 to play. 10 days later, however, the Burnley faithful would have been down in Manchester Road Station at midnight, vulnerable after an ambition-ending 5-0 loss at Wickham, leaving them going underground into mid-table. The loss of John Ward, the assistant to Heath, was the proverbial derailment of the Burnley promotion push. The mastermind tactician behind Heath's wonderful man management left the Clarets lacking on the final stretch. 8 points from an available 24 against the relegated quartet of Peterborough, Notts County, Rotherham and Shrewsbury ultimately proved the difference between the Clarets going up and being also Rans. Little did they know the following season they'd be fighting desperately not to be one of those 4 teams.
Don't start next Friday evening. That match featured on Sky, of course. And, oh, that was a good goal.
The campaign hadn't been derailed by Adrian Heath's move to the Everton coaching staff so much as it never actually got on the tracks. In the end, it was to be another managerial debutant leading the Clarets into the 97-98 campaign. Chris Waddle. Armed with Glenn Roeder and Gordon Cowans as his assistants, the club were busy in the market, bringing in Mark Ford, Steve Blatherwick and Lee Howie, as well as Glenn Little for a combined $750,000. Whilst Howie and Blatherwick never really got going, Little was a mercurial talent waiting to blossom. Marooned to bottom of Division 2 after a loss at Gillingham, Paul Barnes delivered a seeming knockout blow with his departure to Huddersfield Town. Little did Clarets fans know he'd been sold exchange for a certain Andy Payton.
Coming up to 7 minutes, Andy Payton, 1-0. It's the ball run forward here. Now a chance here for Ford. And a chance for Cook. And Cook, 1-0.
A goal every other game in 24 outings was night and day compared to Barnes' pitiful 6 goals from 30 matches earlier on in the season. Marlon Beresford's departure to Middlesbrough in March in the middle of a barren winless run might have tipped the Clarets over the edge. However, goalkeeping coach Chris Woods stepped in and deputised. After Grimsby, Bristol City and Fulham had all pitched up to Turf Moor and got nothing, the Clarets edged closer and closer to safety, and yet they still required favours from elsewhere. That was because of a blowing of a 2-goal lead away at Oldham, drawing 3-3 in the final week of the season. The permutation's simple. Burnley needed to better Brentford's result. The problem was their opponents at Turf on May the 2nd. 1998 required the same thing to survive. Meanwhile, Brentford travelled to playoff hopefuls Bristol Rovers.
He can't get it under control. To the byline, a good chip in! Yeah, a goal! And it got! Play from the winger, a good cross too! And that's the equaliser. A brilliant cross. It's left foot shot from him! Oh no! What do we see? Oh no! If I know Andy Payton, Demi and Matthews. Oh! Oh, what a goal! Burnley are saved once again, and we can look forward to a promising Division 2 next year.
Only moments were saved for the relief of survival before the next bombshell quickly followed. Chris Waddle had resigned. Once that shock dissipated, the new manager's shortlist looked promising. The favourite was Notts County's Sam Allardyce, with Neil Warnock and Stan Ternent waiting in the wings. The former ultimately couldn't be released from Nottingham, so the latter took charge. The season would be a reversion back to a financial look over the shoulder, rather than any of the football played out on the pitch, sadly. Whilst a final resting place of 15th seemed safe, it was only safety by 5 points, but the club had undergone a massive shift in direction. With the welcoming of the club accounts, debt now stood at almost £4 million, thanks to the Turf Moor renovations. Weeks later, Barry Kilby walked in, put the club back into the black, investing £5 million whilst re-signing Steve Davis from Luton, as well as Mickey Mellon, Graham Branch, Ali Pickering, Paul Cook, Tom Cowans and Lenny Johnrose. Once again, it was a season that set in stone Andy Payton's importance to the club, as he netted 20 of the Clarets' 54 league goals. The final season of the millennium would mean a Burnley revolution picking up pace.
To give us more minutes here. Little again. And Mitchell Thomas got it. Goal! Andy Payton! And it looks as though he's been stretched onto the field through the obstacle course. Can you believe that? And they're rattling through that obstacle. And Burnley comes out to great cheers.
Stan Ternent was not shy in moulding the squad to how he wanted it, shipping out 12 players immediately, whilst returning Paul Cook to the fold and acquiring the experienced centre-half Mitchell Thomas. In the automatics, by the end of September, not even their first goalless league draw with Preston at the 113th attempt could stop the Clarets. After some indifferent results as late as October, Ternent swapped his weak 3-5-2 system out for the traditional 4-4-2, which placed Burnley into the middle of the playoffs, with ambitions of the automatics which only began to be realised come the business end of the campaign. Ian Wright was even signed, making his debut against the Wigan Athletic of John Bond and John Benson, i.e. the ghosts of Turf Moor past. Come the start of April, the Clarets hadn't moved, still in 5th place, still biding their time, equally spaced between the nothing of 7th and the everything of 2nd, and then they got going.
Again from Cook, and Davis, and it's scored, there's no flag, and Branch plays a beautiful ball in, Andy Payton.
Whilst Wright and Payton would interchange in the starting 11 in advance of spring, it was clearly the trusting of the goals rather than the name that was eking the Clarets over the line. Wright had been instrumental against Brentford, but Payton single-handedly dredged the Clarets through the task of Cambridge, which set up the ultimate final day. Burnley entered the day 3rd, needing to better Gillingham's result to go up automatically with the safety net of the playoffs already confirmed. Burnley travelled to Scunthorpe, doomed to relegation, whilst the Gills travelled to mid-table Wrexham, coached by former Claret Brian Flynn. Should they both slip up, Stoke and Wigan waited in the wings.
Burnley 2. He handed in his feet there. Burnley fans ready to come on to the field. And there it is. Burnley have collected 3 points here. And the Burnley fans go absolutely wild. Automatic promotion, it must be.
In our Tour of Britain playlist, you can see our previous 2 videos on Burnley, as well as other great footballing stories from places like Aberdeen, Dundee and Glasgow, as well as Oxford, Nottingham and Derby, and we've also been to Blackburn.